No. Okay. And Lori, you're brand new.
Yeah, I just got my license, but I'm a professor as well in Idaho, and I'm transitioning to move here. So during my spring break, I came in and took the real estate license, the 7th week of March. I was convinced I had failed, was convinced, and I'm a professor, I'm a freaking professional test taker, you know? I've been a professor since '98, and I even started looking at schedules to see and then when I passed it, I was like, ah.
Wow. Congratulations.
I just started this week. I filled out my paperwork in April with Simon, but knowing that I wouldn't be here for me.
Right,
So
right.
I could kind of be ready.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Fabulous. And Bernice, how long have you been licensed?
I got my license in what? I think it was 2018.
Okay.
And then I was a social worker for 40 plus years, and I just retired in 2022. I did 2 transactions before I retired, so.
Very nice.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I've been a realtor before, so I had many transactions.
Okay, very, all right, very nice.
Professor, I was rookie of the year in Virginia during the late '80s when the interest rates were horrible.
And I was the early to mid '80s. That's when I got in. I got in '84. And when I started, rates were just at 16.5% when I got it.
I remember getting a client 10% once, and they were like kissing my feet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, just like you're thinking.
Well, when rates hit 9.99, do
Yeah.
you remember the newspapers where it was banner headlines? It was almost like as though the headline said the war has ended.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, rates under 10% and
Yeah.
big headline, like with exclamation point, like almost like the war has ended. You know, it was nuts, but that's how it was.
I forget, like that customer got me so many customers. This girl, she's amazing, you know. You have to remember, I'm Mexican in Virginia, and when I sold real estate, I'm Mexican in a very Caucasian part of Florida. The second time I was a realtor, so it just works against you. It just works against you.
I didn't know if when you said you were Mexican in Florida, you're not Mexican in California.
More or less. No, there's more or less. There's safety numbers.
There you go.
I was coming to California, she's Floridian.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay.
Now it's no longer.
Yeah.
All right, now I hope he's got this right because it's what 10:30. 10:32, and I don't have anybody that doesn't say admit.
No, nobody's not.
So I'm a little concerned because it's not showing admit.
Let's see.
Oh, wrong. There are 5 people in the waiting room. View.
Oh, cool.
Admit all. Okay. I was expecting a big blue button.
But
Yes.
there they are.
Sorry, guys. All right. Welcome, welcome. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes, see if we have any more visitors here. Can you guys on Zoom hear me okay?
Yep,
Hi there,
sure
yep, I can
can.
hear ya.
Thanks.
Excellent. Right. This is probably my biggest challenge, especially during presentation, is monitoring the admit all on Zoom. You know, I will tell you, for those who attended my prior Zoom, I hate teaching on Zoom. Okay, my forte is live in person, where I can pick on you personally, you know. But I really hate Zoom as an instructor. Now, I'm just as guilty when I'm the when I, the attendee, I don't have my camera on, and that's part of it. As an instructor, I love to see everyone's faces when I'm teaching, to see if I kind of get through, if the light bulb goes on. I can't really tell if your light bulb go on when I don't see your light faces.
Yeah.
So, all right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna kind of bear with me as I still admit additional folks into the room here. The topic today was supposed to be disclosures and with Simon. And Simon actually ended up having another commitment during this time, so he asked me to fill in. And so he actually didn't even provide me with the slides that he was going to do. So we're going to turn this into a contract class, okay, dealing with the RPA. Because I think if I had to take a guess, that's still where most people still need most of their instruction to first be. You can't even get to disclosures if you don't even have an offer accepted to even get to the disclosure stage. That's not to minimize the importance of still knowing the disclosures, what they are, what they mean, how to have them filled out properly. Okay. However, and I highly suggest, especially for those that are new, okay, that you learn what disclosures are required for our transactions and what they mean. And the reason for that, it is very easy today when we have TCs, transaction coordinators, sending out the disclosures to our clients. And the worst thing that possible could end up being your client then gives you a call and says, hey, I got these disclosures. I have no idea what they mean. Can you go over them with me? And you have no idea what the heck they mean. So, but that'll be another class on another day, maybe with Simon, maybe with me. But we're going to turn this class just into the standard RPA class. And again, you're not going to learn everything you need to learn of the contract in 1 hour. Impossible. Okay. But what I'm going to end up covering is a couple of the major concepts dealing with the RPA that most agents have knowledge on, but their knowledge is minimized and they don't have the full capacity. And so let me go ahead and do a screen share. Let's put the purchase contract on screen, and let me get that up. All right. So now, so now when I see this here, I don't know where everybody is in case I get new admins. Okay, everybody see that on your screens? The page 1 of the purchase agreement?
Yes, we do.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit. But kind of the first thing that I want to cover is dealing with deposit. Okay. And typically if you're a buyer, right now I'm going to be speaking from a buyer's agent perspective. Now, mind you, whenever we talk about the purchase agreement, okay, you can actually, because sometimes we represent buyers, sometimes we represent sellers, okay, how we talk about it and how we advise really can and will vary depending on who we represent, okay. And so one of the first questions when we represent a buyer, when we write up an offer, is outside of the purchase price, okay, which typically is then the first point of dialogue that you then have with your buyers, okay, and this is not a pricing class, okay, so we're going to assume you guys came to an agreement as to what the buyer is going to be offering on the offer. what typically is the next question or next thing to be filled out on the purchase agreement? And that is the deposit. Okay. And typically your buyers are going to then ask you, okay, hopefully, and when I say hopefully your buyers will be asking you, that there will be times, more times than not, that you actually will be writing up an offer or the terms of the offer in front of your buyer, so you know what to put in the offer. Admit these folks. Admit all. There we go. So at that point, what is the purpose of an offer? Why do we, excuse me, what is the purpose of a deposit? Why do we even have deposits in offers? Can anybody
Good faith, good faith amount.
that's part of it. Absolutely.
Got skin in the game.
You got skin in the game. Okay. Anybody on Zoom want to chime in? Why do we even have deposits and offers? The reason why we have deposits and offers is because it's one of the three parts to be of a legally binding contract. Okay. Remember, one of the three parts to have a legally binding contract, for those who've been on my past classes, are what? Offer, acceptance, and the third one, consideration.
Oh.
Okay, three legal elements of an offer. Okay, so at that point, one of the things then, as an example, let's go to D1 here, 3D1 under initial deposit amount. How many days does our contract reflect that a buyer has once an offer is accepted for them to place their deposit into escrow? 3 business days. 3 business days is the default in the contract. Okay. In our current contract, 3 business days is the default. Now, does it have to be 3 business days? Absolutely not. Remember, you as a buyer's agent or as a listing agent can change any amount of days that are pre-written in this contract. Okay. So, as an example, if you represent a buyer and you're in a very competitive marketplace where, let's say, you have multiple offers, and again, many times your buyers will ask you, hey, outside of price, what can we do to make our offer look even more attractive? And one of the things that can be done is be able to just change that 3 business days into, I've done it many times, 1 business day. Okay. But you tell, and then you emphasize to your buyer, in so doing, okay, by the next day, you need to be in a position to wire your money the next day into escrow, because it's what we call a condition of sale. All right. Understand the word I just used, condition of sale, which is different than a contingency of sale. If a buyer and seller agree that the buyer is to place their money into escrow within X days, whether it be 3 business days, 2 business days, 1 business, whatever is then agreed upon, okay, at that point, that amount of days that was agreed upon that the buyer is supposed to do is what is referred to as a condition. And what happens then at that point if the buyer doesn't fulfill his or her or their obligation? If the contract said for the buyer to deposit their funds into escrow 3 business days after the acceptance of offer, and it's now the 4th business day, and you're the listing agent, and you call escrow and said, hey, I never received a receipt reflecting any deposit made on ABC Maple Street. Okay. And escrow then says, that's because we haven't received any deposit. And you now look and go, hey, this is now, for, a day past. A day past when the monies were supposed to put in. Now what? What do we do?
Contract is not valid.
Well, it's not valid, it's still a valid thing, it's a condition of sale. On the basis now the seller has the ability to cancel the sale due to non-performance. It's a condition of sale. In order for us to have a sale, you agreed that you are going to put this money in, and you haven't done it yet within the time frame that was agreed upon. So the seller now has to issue out a notice to perform. All right, and again, our notice to perform gives the buyer 2 days from the receipt of the notice to be able to then get that done. And if it's not done within those 2 days, then the seller can just unilaterally cancel. All right, so, just understand, something as simple as a deposit, okay, it's there for a reason. So here's the big.
Have you had lots of issues with deposits not being made?
I haven't, okay, but I'm a stickler, okay, and I will say in general, all right, it typically is not, in general, but it is your job as the listing agent when you represent the seller on the offer that your sellers now have accepted. In the opening of the escrow is one of the things on your checklist that one should do is, if the contract says buyer has 3 business days to be able to get their deposit in, and the offer was now accepted on Tuesday, okay, what day is day number 1? If an offer was accepted on Tuesday. Wednesday. Okay, the day of offer acceptance is day 0. Day 1 is the following day. So day 3 is then end of business day, Friday. And so I would be on the horn if I didn't get a receipt from escrow on Wednesday or Thursday reflecting the receipt that money was received. I would be by afternoon at the latest. Okay, I wouldn't even wait till afternoon. I'd probably be doing it Friday morning, checking with the buyer's agent. Hey, just wondering, I just checked with escrow. I see that buyers still haven't wired the deposit in. Monies need to be in by end of business day today. Okay, what's going on? Oh, I need to double check, with the buyers. It's like, and part of it is just the babysitting that takes place. All right, because how would it feel if you are working with a seller and the seller is fastidious? Okay, and now it's Monday. You didn't pay attention that Friday it's not in. Okay, it's now Monday morning, Monday afternoon. You get a phone call from your seller. Hey, by the way, is the buyer's deposit in escrow? Well, let me check. Or worse yet, they check with escrow, and escrow says buyer's deposit is not in. And then they go to you. Hey, it's not Monday. That deposit was due on Friday. What the hell is here? If is there an issue? Is this buyer getting cold feet? Okay. Whether it was just a situation where buyers just forgot, they got busy, whatever it be, from a seller's perspective, all of a sudden then, it could get out of hand. For as simple as a simple phone call of doing a little bit of follow-up. Okay. So next question is, when you're writing up an offer, when the buyer says, when we're talking deposit, how big should my deposit be? And your answer is, anybody?
5%.
That would depend on the market conditions.
Good job.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. And so you want to expand on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you're looking at a buyer's market, then obviously you can have a little more leeway as to the amount of deposit you can get away with, as opposed to a seller's market. When you have a whole ton of competition and subsequent multiple offers, you got to, you want to be, you have to give your buyer a shot at getting the property. So that's what I meant by the details of the market condition.
Exactly. Now, a lot of times your buyers are then gonna ask you this question when talking deposit. Well, if I back out of the sale, do I automatically lose my deposit? And how do you answer that?
Yes.
It depends.
Yes,
Necessarily,
No.
not necessarily, no.
you know. The way to answer it is, it depends. It depends on when and how you back out of the sale. If you back out of the sale on the basis of you having a contractual right to back out of the sale, meaning during your investigation period, which is the whole purpose for you as a buyer to be able to investigate anything and everything that is important to you with regards to the home and the purchase and everything that surrounds that, you are able to exercise the ability to back out of the sale penalty-free on the basis of I'm choosing to not move forward, exercising my contingency of not having to move forward with the completion of this sale. Now, if the buyer did not have a contingency to do so, then the answer is, that if you were to back out, or let me even phrase it, if buyer now has removed all contingencies and then decides they don't want to end up completing the sale, then there is a high probability that they will most likely end up losing and forfeiting their deposit. But there's also a big caveat on that, because one cannot talk about deposits without talking about another clause in our contract. And I really wish the powers that be who organize our contracts would have put it right next to it, and that is called the liquidated damages clause. Okay, you cannot talk about the deposit without talking about the liquidated damages clause. Anybody want to give me a definition as to what liquidated damages clause in general means? Not just to real estate, but in general.
Does that action by that purchaser, how does it affect the seller? No?
I'm not quite sure. Repeat that again.
That like the lack of follow through from the purchaser, how does that affect the seller?
Well, that's not what it means, though. I mean, I'm looking, who can describe what the definition of liquidated damages means, just in general?
I can try.
They have to pay.
In case someone withdraws and one of the sides has suffered some, let's say, damages because of delays or cancellation, or they've already spent some times, then they will get compensation for that.
Very good, very good. Kind of how I describe it or how I define it. It's a liquidated damages by definition is an agreement in advance of what the remedy will be in the event that there is a breach in the contract. Okay. So in our particular case of real estate, our liquidated damages clause means this. But and this is under the condition that the buyer who is writing the offer is intending to own or occupy the property, and the property is a single family up to 4 units. So if it's a 5 units or more, okay, what I'm about to say does not apply. Okay. And so what it means in real estate under the liquidated damages clause is that if the buyer were to back out without having any contractual right to back out, the buyer is agreeing to forfeit their deposit as damages in full to the seller in exchange for the seller agreeing to accept that as damages in full and not suing the buyer for anything further. Because in absence of a liquidated damages clause, and when a buyer ends up backing out of a sale without having a contractual right to do so, what could a seller do? They could sue the buyer under a legal premise of specific performance. And specific performance is a legal term, meaning abiding by the terms of the contract. Meaning, Mr. Buyer, I have a legally binding contract with you, of which I then relied upon. I'm not interested on only retaining $20,000 or $25,000. Okay, that doesn't get me to my next destination, because I need all my proceeds from the sale of my home to be able to go buy my dream home out in Hawaii or wherever it is. So I'm going to sue you. I want all my money. I'm going to sue you to buy my house. And they have in absence of a liquidated damages clause, a seller can do that. Now the question is do sellers would most sellers do that? Because we can talk about what a seller has the right to do, and then there's the reality of life of do they really want to go through that process of going through a lawsuit, all the thousands of dollars of hiring attorneys, and the 1.5 to 2 years that it takes to get a court case through the system, and still without even 100% guarantee. So the answer is the sellers have that right to do so. So let me go to the liquidated damages clause. Now understand, in the contract, there it is. In the contract, you're going to see that it has buyer's initials and seller's initials. So what does that mean? That this liquidated damages clause is an optional clause. It doesn't automatically happen. In order for the liquidated damages clause to be in effect, all parties to the contract must initial it. Hear that loud and clear, guys. Okay, whether you're a buyer's agent or a seller's agent. If the intent of liquidated damages, if the intent of the parties were to have everybody be in agreement of the liquidated damages clause, if there was a forgotten initial to be put on the contract at the time of the acceptance of the offer, guess what you don't have as part of your accepted offer? Liquidated. Now, everyone may think they do, but I will guarantee the party who is at risk, what if all of a sudden then everything starts falling apart, the one who can benefit most by not having it forfeited at that point, they may not agree to liquidated damages once the shit hits the fan, excuse my French. Okay, so it is really important, if you are, whether you're the buyer's agent or the listing agent, you know, if you're the buyer's agent and you notice that there's two parties on the seller side, but there's only one initial at the time of the acceptance of the offer, why everything is still hunky-dory and happy, you know, your job as the buyer's agent is to get a hold of the listing agent and say, hey, by the way, I noticed, you know, we're missing an initial there by the wife. Okay, I think it was just an oversight of typically that is what takes place. go ahead and get that thing, initialed by the wife. Okay, to make sure it's done, and vice versa. If you're the listing agent and you see two buyers and there's only one initial, question that buyer's agent. Hey, was it your intent to have the liquidated damages clause initialed? If so, please resubmit with both initials on it. Or if not, if it wasn't the intent, remove the initial from the one party. Okay. Now, mind you, depends on which buyer you're working, what kind of buyer you're working with. I mentioned that the amount of deposit at risk when the liquidated damages clause is agreed upon, if the buyer were to back out without having any contractual reason to do so, is 3%, is a maximum of 3% if it was a single family residence, okay, and of which then they were intending to owner occupy. But what happens if your buyer is an investor? By definition of an investor, are they going to owner occupy that property? Okay. So when that investor asks you, well, gee, if I were to back out without having a contractual reason to back out, how much will I lose in so doing? Okay. The answer is no longer your 3%, up to the maximum of 3%. The answer is whatever the deposit that was then paid. So if the buyer ended up putting 5% deposit down as a deposit, and then they back out without having a contractual reason to back out, they then could end up losing 5%. So be very careful as a buyer's agent that if you're working with an investor, if they were to ask you, oh, don't worry, Mr. Buyer, the maximum you could lose is 3%, okay, and they wrote a 5% deposit, and they backed out, and they lost 5%. And they go, well, wait a second, I thought it was only up to 3%. And they go, well, that's only if you are occupied. Well, my agent told me. Okay, what do you think is then going to happen?
They're going to consider.
Yeah, that buyer is going to lose their 5%, but guess who's initially, but guess how they're going to make up that extra 2%? Because they relied upon what their agent, told them. Okay, so now understand whether it be owner occupied or non-owner occupied, referring to owner occupied or investor, the amount of deposit that the buyer can lose is up to 3%, but it's the actual deposit paid. So if one wrote an offer with 1% deposit and it was accepted and that deposit was put into escrow, okay, and all contingencies have been signed off, and then buyer backs out of the sale, the seller is entitled now to how much deposit? What percent? Now, if you're a listing agent, how much deposit do you want to see buyers put into escrow ideally? I like to see at least 3%. Okay, regardless. So here is a major thing that most agents are not aware of. Why? I'm not sure. Okay, but it could cost their sellers dearly if the circumstance occurred. Are there ever times when you're a listing agent, especially now like in this marketplace, because is this marketplace as robust as it was just a few years ago? Are buyers lining up around the block to get into the house on open houses? And are we having 20 offers per house in today's market? No, we're not having those. Okay. And so when we're not having that, you know, again, when your buyer then asks how much deposit should be, and, you know, as Ron, you know, mentioned, he goes, it depends. Do you have to automatically go for the juggler thing when you represent the buyer if you know that your buyer will end up being the first offer on this property and this property's been on the market already for 2 months? Okay, you know, as a buyer's agent, okay, that you now have a little, most likely a little wiggle room to work with because the seller may be a little bit more eager to negotiate. Okay, and when we talk about eager to negotiate, it's not just on price only, it's on terms. So one of the things a lot of times we'll end up seeing is we'll end up seeing that deposits will be written at 1%. I do it with my buyer. I know at that point, if I have a buyer and we're the only offer in and the market's been on, house has been on the market for a little bit. And, you know, so I'll tell you what, why don't we go with the lower deposit, but I will advise them as we write the offer that there could be a high probability that it may be countered for an increased deposit. And so I now will speak to you now when you're a listing agent, if you're the listing agent who now wants to make sure that when you receive an offer on your client's listing, that you want the deposit to be 3%. And when you receive that offer, you notice that the liquidated damages clause is initialed by the buyers and that the buyers are intending to owner occupy the property. And so at that point, within the counter offer, you advise your seller to be able to, I like to make sure we work with high deposits. Let's make sure we counter the deposit amount to be increased and the deposit amount to be increased to 3%. Seller agrees, gets written up in the counter offer, buyer agrees to it. Buyer also ends up placing the money into escrow the next day. Why is the money into escrow? 2.5 weeks later, buyer signs off on all contingencies. Let us then say, for this example's sake, that the sales price was $1 million. So, and the initial deposit was then written for $10,000. But the ultimate deposit placed into escrow was how much? $30,000. But on day 25 of the 30-day escrow, after all contingencies have been signed off, buyer now backs out of the sale, cancels the sale. So at that point, buyer now fills out cancellation of sale. And under cancellation of sale, there is a section of dealing with the deposit amount of who gets the deposit and how much. And under the return of deposit, okay, it is listed this way: $10,000 goes to seller, $20,000 goes to buyer. And you're the listing agent, and you look at that and you go, wait a second here. No. My seller is entitled to $50,000. You know, you without all contingencies being signed off. The liquidated damages clause was initialed. You know, no, my seller is entitled to all $30,000. Guess what?
Because there's no DID form.
Thank you. Okay. Our contract, and it is crazy how so many agents are not aware of this. In order to have that additional $20,000 be part of the liquidated damages, there needs to be this other form to be incorporated into the contract and signed by the buyer. And I want you to read the uppercase portion of the last lines of the liquidated damages clause. At the time of any increased deposit, buyer and seller shall sign a separate liquidated damages provision incorporating the increased deposit as liquidated damages, Form DID. So when you are the listing agent and within your negotiations of that, if the seller is now increasing the deposit amount for the buyer, and the buyer and liquidated damages clause is part of the contract. Here is what I write in my counteroffers. Buyer to increase their deposit to X. Buyer shall end up wiring their deposit funds into escrow within, I always like making it 2 business days. I take it down from the 3 business days in our standard contract to 2 business days when I am then and then here's the kicker. Within 1 business day of funds being wired into escrow, buyer shall sign CAR Form DID. And so, just like we talked about, if the buyer agrees to this in the counter offer, and buyer now ends up wiring all his funds, the $30,000, the 3%, into escrow, by him they agreeing to sign Form DID within 1 business day makes that signing of Form DID a what? A condition of sale. All right. So what that then means is you now, at the time of acceptance of the offer, so if today is Friday and your offer gets accepted tomorrow, Saturday, and you're the listing agent, and it's then said buyer to wire their fund within 2 business days. So 2 business days is Monday, Tuesday, and within 1, and let's say then it was Tuesday that they wired their funds in. And the contract also said within 1 business day for Form DID to be signed. That means I need to be able to have received Form DID by Wednesday. Well, what I'll be doing first and foremost, I won't even wait. Again, if I don't have a receipt in on Monday from escrow that the funds have been received by escrow, Tuesday morning, I'm on the phone with the buyer's agent. Hey, just a reminder, funds need to be in today. And then tomorrow, and then by Thursday morning, I better have received that Form DID. And if not, I'm now, again, both back on the phone with the buyer's agent. What's going on? Why isn't this signed? And depending on how that response went, I now will be having a discussion with my seller. Do we need to end up having to issue out the notice to perform? Okay. And that's your job as the listing agent to ensure all that. Now, it sounds like, that it's really complicated. It's not complicated. It's just part of doing our jobs as the respective agents. Because there's nothing worse. There is nothing worse than if your seller is expecting to receive $30,000 and you now tell them, oops, okay, you're only entitled to 10. And the 20 goes back. They go, well, why? And then worse yet, they go, well, why? Because I, as your agent, didn't ensure that Form DID was signed by the buyer. Matter of fact, I will share a story. A couple of years ago, I was teaching a contracts class right here in this very office. I gave this exact example. And at the end of the class, the agent comes up to me and says, Steve, you're not going to believe I had this exact situation occur, where I was the listing agent representing the seller, and the buyer backed out of the sale. It was $1 million sale. The deposit initially was written for 15, counted at 30, buyer put 30 in, backed out at the very end. But because the buyer's agent also had no idea about Form DID, okay, buyer ended up forfeiting all $30,000 to the seller. The question the agent had for me is, gee, is my seller going to be on the hook now for having to give back that 15 grand? I answered it this way, and I don't think so, because then escrow, there was a separate agreement between on the cancellation instructions where buyer agreed to forfeit to seller $30,000. Okay, so however, I do believe that buyer, if that buyer were to find out that contractually he did not have an obligation to forfeit the full 30, only the 15, I firmly believe that buyer would have an action against his buyer's agent saying, why in the hell didn't you inform me that all I had to cough up was 15, not 30? Okay, so, and it is crazy how many agents. So I will acknowledge when I represent a buyer, okay, in this in a marketplace such as this, I will take advantage on behalf of my buyer, for my buyer, of initially writing lower deposits and prepping them for that. It may come as a higher deposit, okay, in the form of a counteroffer. And I'm purposely keeping it quiet about Form DID and see if listing agent ends up referencing it at all. And if they don't, I keep my mouth shut to the listing agent. Not that I want my buyer to back out of the sale. However, if they do, okay, I become a champion at that point, because in their head, they're thinking they're going to forfeit the whole thing. And now I get to be the hero, letting them know contractually, you're only on the hook for this, not that.
Steve?
So
Hang on. Sorry.
if you do commit one of those errors, does errors and omissions cover you there?
Maybe. You know, it very well might. But remember, even with errors and omissions, okay, you still got deductibles. And most of our deductibles are pretty high deductibles. You know, I think in this office, it's either $5,000 or $10,000, you know, at that point. You know, but again, even outside of that, something as, I hate to use the word as simple, but as simple as making sure a document is filled out, you will then have lost all your goodwill with your client, you know, at that point. Well, question.
So as we can see, this clause is mainly skewed towards the seller. What about the buyer? So what does the buyer get when they are, you know, they have spent money on reports, inspections, etc.?
You're going to get asked that all the time. Well, gee, isn't there a liquidated damages clause if the seller were to back out? Okay. The answer is no. Per our contract. Now, could one theoretically write in their own liquidated damages clause if in the event? Yes, one could. Okay, I've never seen it. Okay, but yes, if the seller were to back out, okay, again, in order for a cancellation to occur, there has to be mutual cancellation signed by all parties. So if a seller wants to cancel and a buyer doesn't, all right, again, what was the seller's option? If liquidated damages clause wasn't initialed and a buyer backed out and they didn't want to take the deposit, okay, a specific performance lawsuit. Buyer has the same remedy. They could go all the way to the extreme of being able to issue a specific performance lawsuit, or at that point be able to end up saying, you know, all right, Mr. Seller, you want to cancel? Tell you what, not only if you reimburse me for my out-of-pocket expenses, I will let you off the hook and let you out. Sometimes you can say, well, I'll tell you what, you want out, all right? I agree, not only are you gonna reimburse me for my expenses, you're gonna pay me to walk away. And I haven't, God, I don't think I've had one of these 25 or 30 years. I mean, I'll be honest about it. But I know if I represented a buyer and the seller wanted to back out, not only would I potentially try to negotiate on his behalf of, yeah, give me some walkaway money, but also then have a clause in there that the seller cannot resell this property, probably for a period of time of like 3 to 5 years without giving that buyer the first right of refusal. Okay, to be able to repurchase it. Okay. And so, but there is no liquidated damages clause that rewards the buyer financially, just like it does to the buyers.
Hey, Simon? Sorry,
Steve,
yeah, Steve, sorry, Simon is on.
I know, under his.
I've also known of of occasion that there was a dispute over the deposit, and the first thing the buyer did when the seller refused to release their EMD was hire an attorney and get a lis pendis filed immediately, whereby tying up the seller, not being able to resell. So it's always best to have some sort of a meeting of the mind, regardless of when conditions were removed or what the situation is between buyer and seller, rather than let it escalate. And I think at the end of the day, at that particular case, they just compromised. The buyer got some of his money back. The seller didn't get the whole thing, but they walked away with it.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's really what this is all about. I mean, ultimately, when things go well, but especially when things go poorly, it's what can now be done that's really still in the best interest of my client. Okay, that works long term, and which really is almost the definition of win-win, but on the basis of when things are falling apart, what's the best win-win solution of a bad situation? Okay, it's better than a lawsuit. It's better than having your property tied up, right? The lis pendens where you can't sell, you can't even refinance, okay, and put a new loan on the property with that cloud on the title. And so and so ultimately that's what we're in the business of, is providing the best win-win scenarios as possible. Okay, I will tell you, I've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this over 40 years now. And I will tell you, the best transactions that I've ever had have been with agents who understand the concept of win-win. I remember early on in my career, I had one agent who thought the only way for her client to win was for my client to lose. And it didn't matter if I said up, she said down, I said black, she said white, I said round, she said square, and it was an absolute tug of war, the whole transaction. And there was no reason for it, absolutely no reason for it. And so, ultimately, our clients are looking, whether you represent the buyer, whether you represent the seller, buyers are looking to sell their home for the most amount of money as possible. But the number one thing both buyers and sellers are looking for are the least amount of hassles, okay, the least amount of headaches, okay. They're willing, they'll gladly pay a premium. Buyers are willing to pay a premium, okay, if they end up feeling like they're getting the service that they deserve of being able to pay a premium with, okay, where they feel protected, And that's really, what it's about. All right, what time we have? We got another 5 minutes. Does anybody have questions on the liquidated damages clause that I haven't covered yet? So again, kind of the takeaway, again, when talking deposit, you cannot talk deposit without having the dialogue of liquidated damages right as part of a combined discussion. And that's why I said I really wish they would have moved that, within the grid, but I understand why they didn't. But I wish they would have, from that. But what's really important, I think, out of anything, one of the things that most agents do today is most agents don't actually go over the contract with your clients. And it's really, really important. And it's hard to do that when you're not confident with the contract, okay, when there's so much. And so it's so easy to be able to hide behind your computer via DocuSign, when you just text your client, well, how much do you want to make the offer for? And you want a 30-day escrow and it's 20% down payment? And it's like, okay. And so it's definitely one that, if you want to become better agents, be able to have the willingness to be able to sit down with your buyers and go over this contract clause by clause. Okay. And so, there's a lot to it. Today's agent has a hell of a lot harder than when I started. Because when I started, California's purchase contract was 1 page long. And the actual contract itself actually was a half page long. The other half was all the definitions. It was before inspections. It was before disclosures. Okay, we had none. Okay, and so I had to grow up with the contract. No doubt about it. And so, so now you guys are kind of just, woke up to this whole 17-page document here, plus all the additional addendums. And there's a lot. There really are. And it was CAR's way of trying to circumvent, all possibilities of issues that take place. And the reality is there will always be issues. And that's why the contract gets longer and longer and longer. They're trying to circumvent as best they can. But the reality is a buyer and a seller, if one wanted to, could literally draft a contract on a napkin. I don't advise it, but one could. It's in writing. Okay. If buyer says, I agree to buy your house for $1 million, okay, and here's my name, here's the address and the whole bit, and buyer and seller agree, and the buyer puts in a deposit into escrow, okay, and they could have everything verbal of, well, I put 10 grand in escrow and let's close in 45 days. And, they could, again, don't advise it, but that's really all it takes. But that's not what we have. We have all these pages that allows for all these contingencies, All right, any last questions just in general on the contract before we call it a day? I'm open for any contract, any question on the RPA here that anybody may want to get some clarity on. All
I have
right.
a question, but I just wanted to say thank you so much. This was great.
Excellent.
Helped me out a lot.
I definitely hope that helps. One of the things, actually, if anybody wants to have a little bit further instruction, actually, I have nothing going on tomorrow morning. And I'd be willing to come here to the office for a few hours and to be able to go over the contract with you guys, okay? And where you can actually hear my dialogue as an agent as though you guys are the prospective buyers. Okay, as though we're writing up an offer. Okay, and where we can go over everything kind of clause by clause. I'm willing to do that but I have to admit, I don't want to do it over Zoom. I'd rather just do it live here. And so, I really have nothing going on tomorrow, and I go, let me get back a little bit. So if you want, we can be here at 9 in, go to noon if you guys, and whoever wants to take me out to lunch can take me out to lunch afterwards. That type of thing. So if you're able to make it, that would be great. If not, we'll see you on a future class.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. You guys are
Thanks. Have a great day.
I would like to ask something,
very good.
Steve. Just
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to understand before we make the offer with the buyer.
Okay.
Who are the parties we should coordinate with? Because I'm understanding now that it's better to talk to the loan officer even before submitting the offer and to know who the warranty company is, and what policy we're gonna submit in the offer, right?
No, well, no, you're buying. You're the seller. Within the offer, there is a owner's policy, and then you're also having it where the buyer obtains a buyer's policy, which is title insurance, and so it really is not that critical because most title companies are all pretty reputable that we're dealing with here. Okay, but the two parties that I highly recommend you is when you represent the buyer, absolutely be in touch with their loan rep just to ensure where they're at in their loan approval process and to find out where they are on their qualification. Are they already at the offer amount that you're initially going in? Are they already at their maximum? Or is there some breathing room in the sense of can they still come up more in purchase price, still with the same down payment amount? Because again, if they go up in purchase price, still with the same down payment, that increases their loan amount. So do they have the latitude to be able to qualify? Or if plain and simply, they say, well, 700,000 is the absolute tops of the loan amount, and they're only putting $300,000 down, and so they're going for $1 million. So no, they can't go for $1,050,000 unless you're able to talk to the buyer. Do you have any other source of funds available to you? Because according to your lender, they can't qualify you or approve you for more than 700,000. So if you already have the 3 and 7 is the max, okay, that they're willing to lend, at that point based on the ratios, then plain and simple, you're coming. This is your one and only offer on price that we can then go. We have no wiggle room. So that's real important. Second thing that's really important is to try to have dialogue with the listing agent, because you want to be able to know where you're sitting, okay, based on how long the property's been on the market. Have they had any prior offers? Were they in escrow? Kind of feeling out the flavor, what the situation of the seller is. Are you a solo offer? Is it multiple offers? Because how one advises writing a multiple offer is different than a property that's the first offer and the property has been sitting on the market for 60 or 90 days. Okay, and then most importantly, then also on your standpoint as the buyer's agent, be able to know your comps, know where the value of the property is. Okay, based on what based also on what the asking price is. And sometimes, okay, you're going to end up saying, wow, based on the comps, this property is overpriced. But if your buyer fell in love with it, okay, at that point, let them know that if you end up buying it at this price, you're paying a premium. And paying a premium isn't always a bad thing. I've had many buyers who say, I'm willing to pay a premium. This is gonna be a 20-year home. Okay, so if I don't pay 20 grand, I'm here for 20 years. That's $1,000 a year. Who cares? Okay, but, you then have to have that second discussion based on their down payment, dealing with what happens if the event it doesn't appraise, and you need to have that whole discussion. And for those who will be here tomorrow, I'll get into that discussion of how to have the appraisal discussion and what that then means and what the buyer then needs to do under the what if scenario. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Very good. All right, guys, enjoy the day. And for those who will be here tomorrow, I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
9 o'clock, you said?
9 o'clock. Again?
Yeah. Okay. You are.
I will see you tomorrow.
Sounds great. Perfect.
I have an open house, but I'll be here for partner.
All right, that'll work.
Okay, bye-bye now.
Bye, nice to meet you, Jamie.